Thank you so much. You don't need this. So as we're here today, and really every minute of every day, all across the country and all around the world, people are giving of themselves to help others. Sometimes in incredibly difficult and dangerous situations where everyone else is doing everything they can to get out, there are people who rush in to try to help. I've been to those places and I've met those people. Sometimes the service that people provide is a little less dramatic. Think teachers, election workers, journalists, the volunteers of all sorts. Service is so important to who we are that it's pretty frightening to imagine what would happen if we didn't have service in the world. What would our individual lives be like? What would our society be like? But let me ask you a pretty difficult question. Where in the United States of America or anywhere is there a museum or a memorial dedicated to honoring all forms of service? That's kind of troubling that you have to think about it, but there is none. That's more troubling. Nowhere in the country. Now, we have thousands of memorials to military service and to wars, and that's understandable. And when people say, thank you for your service, which we've all heard, probably many of us have said, we almost always are applying that to military service. But it shouldn't just be those in military uniform who answer the call to service, nor should it just be their service that we recognize and acknowledge and express gratitude for. Let me give you an example of something we're missing by defining service so narrowly, and it's a pretty powerful example. Remember in the early days of COVID, when we didn't have personal protective equipment, when doctors and nurses didn't even have masks and gloves, they were flipping masks around, wearing them for a week, and they're supposed to be used for a day. There was no diagnostic test. There was no effective treatment. There was no vaccine. People were dying by the thousands. And yet every day, every night, frontline healthcare workers went to work. They knew full well that the disease they had watched killing people could take their lives, and they still went. They answered that call to serve. More than 3,600 frontline healthcare workers died of COVID. That's more than people who died, the numbers who died on September 11th. And there's no place in the United States of America to honor that service, no physical place. There's one website, it's very moving, but no physical place. My own background, I was a clinical neuropsychologist. I spent 20 years working on cancer units in psychiatric hospitals and ultimately working extensively with brain injury patients. And I also was a university professor, and I volunteered whenever I could. And then at one point, as you may know, I went off my medications and ran for Congress. And the truth is, that decision to run for Congress against pretty long odds, I can tell you, was motivated by service. And people say, what was the best part about being in Congress? The best part was meeting incredible people who served others. Sometimes, in my district, we had 200-year floods in a 12-year period. People said, let's get rid of that guy. We're going to have more floods. But these floods came and wiped out. They claimed lives, they claimed houses, infrastructure, and people's dreams. But what happened? From all around our state, from all around the region, folks showed up. FEMA was there, the National Guard was there, the Scouts were there, faith-based groups were there, just average citizens showing up, how can I help? Giving everything they could to people they'd never known before and would never meet again. I also was able to travel to Iraq and Afghanistan. I went to Gaza as well and met courageous people, both our men and women in uniform, military uniform, but civilian workers, workers with relief organizations, volunteers, trying to do their best, again, to help folks they'd never met before. Well, the question for me was, what are we going to do to honor those folks? But here's the interesting thing. None of those people I just described sought recognition. None of them sought wealth. None of them sought to increase their cliques. They just were there serving for the sake of serving others. And with the utmost respect for that humility and sincerity of motive, I believe we need to honor all that form of service. Not because the people who serve demand it or seek it, but because they deserve it. And maybe more importantly, because we need to see it, especially in America now. We need to see examples of selflessness, not selfishness, of people who give to others because it's the right thing to do. Now, it's true that sometimes organizations or communities will try to honor service in all its forms by having service awards. And I want to play angel's advocate for a second, because the way service awards typically work is something like this. Their call goes out for nominations. Groups of people say, let's nominate this person. They do wonderful work. And maybe, let's say, get 40 nominations. Then they get a blue ribbon panel of people. They spend a whole day, they review the nominations, they pick the person for the annual award, and that person is recognized at a banquet, and they get a plaque and make some remarks. Here's what the angel's advocate says. Let me get this straight. Let's say you started with 40 stories of people doing good things. Then you went to really a lot of trouble to pick one winner, which made 39 people losers. And then you honored that one winner one night a year in a closed banquet that maybe cost a lot of money in front of a pretty small crowd of people who probably already knew the story. I understand it's well-intentioned, but it's not very effective. If you're a marketer, you're going to say, where's the reach? Where's the frequency? Where's the salience? All those kind of things. Another variation, which we won't go into a lot of detail, but is the annual service day. We're going to pick 2 days a year for service, and then that's where we honor service. It's like the kids' table of recognition. You didn't do real service, but we'll honor you for 1 day of the year. I think we need to exponentially increase that. We need to honor all forms of service, all the time, in places all across our communities where everyone will see them and be inspired. And we need to connect people with how they can serve themselves. Well, how do we do that? Obviously, there's a lot to it, but I want to share with you a couple of ways I think we can do it. Remember my question at the opening was, where's the place where we honor service in all its forms? Wouldn't it be great if in our nation's capital we had such a place like that? On the National Mall, we've got places where we see stuffed dinosaurs and spent rocket ships and abstract art, but service, sorry, you're out. Except for military service again. So we could establish a national museum proximal to the National Mall in an existing building. You can do it pretty affordably. Then you invite service organizations to create their own exhibits, and you create a place where all forms of service are honored. Rotary Club, Lions Club, Peace Corps, America, faith-based organizations, government workers, etc. And we can all celebrate together. Now, okay, that's great, but not everybody gets to Washington, D.C. How do we do this locally? Well, let's start with our schools, our future generation of service, but not future. Let's not forget, young people want to serve. It's in their DNA. And almost every high school or junior high I've ever been in has an athletic trophy display case. Maybe 1% of the student body can ever be in that, because not only do you have to like athletics and be athletic, you got to win a championship. But every student has the capacity to serve. Every student can serve. And every student can pitch in and make their own displays. I asked a group of high school kids, I said, could you create a display of service? They said, sir, 2 weeks and we'll have them. Pulled out their cell phone. We're going to talk to people who serve. We're going to interview them. We're going to find out what makes them tick, why they do it. We're going to create service exhibits. We'll put them all over our schools, not just in a glass trophy case where nobody sees it, but in the hallways, in the library, in the campus of the colleges, everywhere telling the story of students, alums, faculty, and staff who make a difference. All right, how do we reach the rest of the community? Well, every community has places people go, libraries, community centers, senior centers. Work again with your service organizations, have them help create the exhibits, put those up in places people already go, so you have now communities of service, not just the 1 night a year, one person in the closed room, but examples of service all around the community. They can be made affordably, rotate them around so they stay fresh, renew them every year, and now you're honoring everybody who serves. So the good news is that everybody has the resources, and thank goodness you don't need an act of Congress or even worse, a presidential initiative. You can do it yourself, and you don't even have to spend all your life writing grants that you're never going to get. The resources are in your own community and in every single community in America. Think of the power of that. Here's one that you may not expect, but I think it'd be beautiful. It's a Saturday afternoon, you're at the ball game. 4th inning's just wrapped up. The announcer says, ladies and gentlemen, the Los Angeles Dodgers would like to have you join us in acknowledging all the veterans in the audience today and people who serve. If you're in the Marines, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, please stand and be recognized. And people stand and be recognized, mostly men, but they stand around the stadium. And now the announcer does something kind of amazing. The announcer says, and now the Dodgers would also like to honor all the other people here tonight who serve. If as a volunteer in your profession or contributions to charity, if any way you help your community, please also stand and let us recognize you. And now thousands more stand, more women now, more people of all ages. It's a kind of an amazing thing. It's something even more incredible, perhaps says. And before the next inning starts, when you sit down, turn to your neighbor, introduce yourself, and say, thank you for your service. 70 million Americans watched the baseball game last year. It would be transformative. It could happen every day. And that's just baseball. Now, why do it now? Because our nation's in big trouble. There is an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. The Surgeon General issued a whole report about that 2 years ago. We know our political system is as divisive as it's been since the Civil War. Surveys about trust in institutions show it at almost an all-time low. Less than 50% even trust nonprofits and charitable organizations. There's this pervasive cynicism. And only 5% of the people surveyed said that they or a loved one had actually used a nonprofit in the last year, when the fact is we all benefit from nonprofits every single day of the year. So how do we know this is going to work? Well, you don't have to be a social scientist to understand it, but if you were, you'd find a lot of research about this. And let me put it in words that we're all going to understand. First, common sense, but also social science. The more you see examples of people who you can relate to doing something good, and the more that good that they're doing gets acknowledged and respected, guess what? The more likely you are to do it yourself. Okay, that's one. Number two, service is remarkably able. It's the best thing. Part of why I'm working so hard on this is this. I know of no better way to transcend our divisions. When you serve with somebody, you learn to respect your differences and transcend your divisions. If there was a loud explosion outside right now, a car had crashed, and we heard it, someone screamed, we're going to run outside. We're not going to say, well, only the Democrats can help right now. We would run outside, we would help the person, and afterward we'd come in and have a beer together or something. Maybe a milkshake in my case. That's my preferred beverage. But service transcends differences. So that's the second benefit. That's how we get past the divisiveness and stuff. The third benefit, service gives you a sense of purpose in life. And when you have a purpose in life, you are more likely to live a longer and a healthier life. So that's the scientific research. But there is another reason why we need to do this, and we need to do it now. And this is super important. It's the fate of our democracy. Democracies fail from within. When people who are motivated by selfishness rather than service use the process of democracy to gain power, and then use the power to undermine the democracy. You know, if we're to turn this around, we have got to reinstate those immortal words, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We've got to recreate that in our body politic. Among the electors, the people who who run for office, the people who are elected, but also the voters. That's got to be our value as well. And you know, the Declaration of Independence itself, this value actually happened way before the country started. It was native peoples had values of service. Some chose their tribal chairman to be the person who gave the most, not the person who had the most. There's a concept. There's a concept. The Declaration of Independence, which we're going to celebrate the 250th of next year, has a lot of problems to it, a lot of beautiful, powerful lines. But what we don't talk about a lot is the final line of that document, which reads, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And they capitalize lives, fortunes, and honor. You can't commit more than that. And when we talk about celebrating 250 years, what got us those 250 years? It is that ethic of service. And without that ethic of service, we won't sustain another 250 years as the kind of country we want to live in and be proud of. So what I'm suggesting is if we start honoring all forms of service all the time, in all public places, we will inspire the country to do the very best, to be what we really could be when we're at our very, very best. And we can do it affordably, rapidly, at local level and at the national level. And once again, the world will see the kind of generous, self-sacrificing, kind country that we once were known as and has slipped away of late. Dr. Martin Luther King said, in a famous speech, it's so good, he said, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. It's called the drum major speech. And he said, you don't need to have a college degree to serve. You don't need to make your subject and verb agree to serve. You just need a heart full of grace and a soul generated by love. We have people doing wonderful things. We have ways to tell their stories. We know it can be effective, and the challenge we're facing are severe. But if we start focusing on the positive, bringing people together, instilling that virtue in young people, and reminding the rest of us that we once had that virtue and we need it, America's going to make it through. I want to thank all of you who serve for your service and for the opportunity to join you today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.